going to move forward with our presentation. So John, I'm going to give you a chance to introduce Sam.
Thank you, Bart. Friends, that was Bart Denboer, who's the executive director of Kairos, West Michigan. We're dedicated to providing space to address the issues that are keeping Israeli Jews and Arab Palestinians from sharing their life together in a more intimate way. I am very glad to introduce, some of you know Sam, many of you have not met him yet. I met him in person in June of 2013 with a trip to Israel-Palestine by Paul Parker. And Sam and I have been in conversation for all those years, about 8 years after that. I've read what he's done. I've listened to his Zoom conferences with several people. I've read all the stuff he puts out. We've been in correspondence. So I have felt that Sam has got a lot to teach Americans about what's going on there. And I'm so glad, Sam, that you're with us. And I want to have you start by telling us what it was like being raised as a Muslim in Youngstown, Ohio, with your family. Tell us a little about your family of origin and your experience in the United States before you moved back to Israel-Palestine.
Thank you, Reverend John. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. When you said 2013, you made me feel very old. Time is flying, right? A little bit about myself, for those who may not know. I'm actually born and raised in Youngstown, Ohio. So I'm as American as Trump. If that's a positive thing, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why I said that, because I thought we had forgot that name. I was born to actually a Muslim father and a Christian mother. So I like to say that I got the best of both worlds, and I'm a happy Jew. But I do follow the Muslim faith. And as someone being raised in a very nationalistic home, what does that mean? It means when the news came on, everybody shut up. The nightly news was the time where everyone was focused on every single day what was happening here. And that gets to you after a while, and you become programmed to follow the events here. And that's the way I grew up. In Youngstown, there's something called the Arab Community Center, where mainly first-generation Palestinians, a lot of them from my father's city, where I am now in Al-Bire, next to Ramallah, would frequent there. So I was able to grow up hearing firsthand of stories of people who had come from Palestine, and that gave me an oral history like no one can get. And it got me even more interested in being here. I studied computer technology at Youngstown State University and married a Palestinian woman, brought her from Ramallah to Youngstown, and we set up shop and we had our first daughter. And then something shook the ground under us. The Oslo peace, actually it's called the Oslo Accords. Everyone likes to call them the Oslo Peace Accords. Rightfully so, they didn't put the word peace in the document. It's called the Oslo Accords were signed. And that was a shocking document. And I half jokingly say that I'm one of 12 people worldwide that actually read the document. And I read it one time too many. And just the short story is, I was fully aware that the occupation had not ended with the signing of the Oslo Accords. However, I was also aware that the checkerboard was being restructured in a way. New stakeholders were coming onto the board, and the roles of the different players were changing. Everyone except one, the Israeli role. They were an Israeli military occupier, they remained an Israeli military occupier, and today they still are an Israeli military occupier. So when I came, I actually ended with a soft landing in Palestine because I was recruited by a group of investors to actually come back and establish the Palestine Telecommunications Company, which was allowed to be established because of the Oslo Accord. So that's a little bit about me, and I can say more later. I would note, if you're interested in the long answer to that question, I was actually profiled in a book that marked the 50th year of the Israeli occupation called Kingdom of Olives and Ash, written by Michael Chabon and his
It's
wife.
really embarrassing for you. It said your name.
I know.
And Eilert Wegman. Both of them are Jewish American writers, well-established writers, and they did a little project and they wrote. And one of the chapters is basically profiling myself. So I'll actually put it in the chat if anybody's interested. My chapter was an article in LitHub. I'll stop there.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing that, Sam. So you came to Ramallah by invitation to set up a telecommunications business, and give us a little bit of a rundown of what it's like to be a businessman with Israeli control of all the levers, all the levers of business, and what the economy is like for Palestinians as over against Israeli control.
I should note from the outset that coming here, relocating from Youngstown to Palestine, there were hopes and dreams. I mean, although understanding the occupation had not ended, we felt that especially in the first 2 or 3 years of the Oslo process, there was a buzz here. Everyone was engaged in what's going to be a post-occupation era. So we were engaged in ending the occupation, but half of our lives were also dedicated to building the institutions and the businesses that were required for what we imagined would be a post-occupation era, thinking that Oslo may have ended the occupation. Even though I personally didn't think that, but that was the buzz in the community. When I got here, working in the largest economic project in Palestine, the telecommunications company, there was no company. There was an idea to form a company by 4 investors. And they hired myself and another person, Dr. Mohammed Mustafa from Washington, D.C. And we basically came a month apart. We landed here and started working on creating that company. Today, that company is the largest private sector employer in Palestine, a significant business concern, as well as a decent investment. If you go to our Palestinian stock exchange, Paltel is the blue chip stock, basically, turning a profit every year since this day it started. That might be good, that might be bad, discussion for a different time. But when I got here, I came with my business mind and my training of how to create a business. And the first thing you do when you want to create a business, especially in a different country, is you learn the laws that are going to be applied to you. And when I started to understand the complex legal system, meaning that the amount of laws that are applied to our community are mind-boggling. We have, when it affects land, for example, until today, 2021, we're still applying some Turkish Ottoman laws, and then some British laws, because when the British had the British mandate, they deployed, like they did in all of their places of colonization. They placed this legal system, which is very well developed, and a lot of that's stuck around. And then we have, from the day of the occupation until today, military orders from the Israeli military that basically trump everything else. Because when you have an issue with the Israeli military orders, there's no place to go to actually judiciate that. You have to end up dealing with it because it's applied by force. But we also have Jordanian law. And now that the Palestinian leadership has signed on to many new international treaties and agreements, we have those obligations as well. So putting all of those together, I understood that this was a legal mess. And I had to start to figure out with my team, how do we mitigate through that? And it was difficult. I'll give you a very quick example. In order to build a telecommunications company, the bread and butter of that company is telecommunication frequencies, what they call technically electromagnetic spectrum frequencies, airwaves. Well, it turns out not only the land is occupied here, but also the airwaves are occupied. And although we had the right in Oslo to start a telecom company, Israel never released the airwaves and said, when we want airwaves, we have to come back to them. And that was a multi-year process to get a sliver of a airwave that we can use. And I can give many examples. That airwave one actually continues until today. All of you have 3G on your phones, probably have 4G. Maybe some of you have entered the 5G phase. We had to negotiate with the Israeli side for 12 years to release the 3G frequency so our companies could put 3G on our phones. That's the kind of economic control that Israel has over our companies. So let's not be fooled that we can create companies. We are doing the best we can, but ultimately the inputs to those companies and our ability to operate is totally under Israeli control.
So thank you for that, Sam. I want to have you say a little bit more about how we can move forward. The occupation, of course, continues on, and we've had, but one of the things you've taught me, Sam, is that the Palestinian state, whose Declaration of Independence was given by Arafat in 1988, has been recognized, not by the United States and Israel and a handful of others, but by 138 nations in the world. And one of the things you've said in one of your documents is, why doesn't the United States, why can't the United States recognize the existence of the Palestinian state and start dealing with them as an entity? Say a little bit more about what the dynamics of that issue are.
Very important point. I would just make a correction. It wasn't Arafat that issued that Declaration of Independence. It was the Palestinian National Council, which is the highest legislative body of the PLO.
Okay, thank you.
Collective decision. It wasn't unanimous. It was a collective decision to declare statehood. What did that mean? It meant for the first time, the Palestinians legislated that they would accept the partition of Palestine and accept Israel's existence. If you read the document, I would say it was implicitly stated, because this was the document that they referenced, Resolution 181, which was the partition plan of 1947. But that started a process. Today, I think it's up to 141 countries that have recognized the state of Palestine. But that, like I said, it was an implicit recognition of Israel in the Declaration of Independence. Fast forward, and we started the Oslo process. What was the Oslo, that peace process? What was the first step to get it going? The first step was a step the Palestinians were required to make. Of course, with our arm behind our back, because we were being pressured heavily, the American side basically said, if you want us to start this process, you have to recognize explicitly the state of Israel. And for better or for worse, and that's a discussion, we recognized, the PLO recognized, in a letter that Arafat sent to Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli prime minister, we recognize the state of Israel.
The legitimacy of the state of Israel.
Exactly. As it is defined in the UN, the state of Israel, not the Jewish state of Israel, because no other entity is being asked to recognize the Jewish state of Israel except us, which is kind of odd. But we can talk about why that word Jewish was added to the discussion. It's basically a Netanyahu nice PR strategy to make us say no, because he knows we will. Legally, we recognize the state of Israel in writing. In reply to that, that was the first step of Oslo. In reply to that, what did the Israeli prime minister send back? He said, thank you for your recognition of Israel, and we in turn, I'm summarizing, recognize the Palestine Liberation Organization is the representative of the Palestinian people. That would be like America going to the People's Republic of China and recognizing it. And in turn, the Republic of China would say, thank you, and we recognize that the Democratic Party is in the chair of the White House today. That is a very lopsided exchange. I would say that was one of the reasons that Oslo failed. Fast forward again, Oslo did fail. It failed multiple times. We got to a point where there is no peace process, but the Israeli settlement building continued more and more. So the Palestinian side finally woke up and went to the United Nations and basically said, we're going to ask the countries of the world to decide, is Palestine worthy of statehood or not? At that point, 138, that's where that number comes from, 138 countries voted yes to Palestine. And that gave us non-member observer status, like the Vatican, and 9 voted no. The US, Israel, Canada, the Czech Republic, and 4 Pacific Islands that can probably fit into my bedroom. Those are the 9 that said no. The mass majority, 70-some% of the world said yes. And that got us to a point where countries then accelerated their bilateral recognition of Palestine. So that process has been ongoing. The majority of the world is on board. And as you said, I make a strong statement, what's the US waiting for? If they're serious about 2 states, they recognized the Israeli state in 1948, 11 minutes after it was announced. After 73 years, isn't it time to recognize the other part of the equation? And they have not. And I guess that's a thing on the Biden agenda, possibly. If I was him, I would recognize Palestine and change the equation and give a message to the Israeli side, a message that was lost in Oslo that says there is an end game. There are 2 states that are going to live on after this conflict.
Yes, thank you for that. I want to introduce now, moving forward, one of the things that I've learned from you, Sam, is that discussion about a 1 state, which is what you have now with Israeli control, or a 2 state, Israeli state and a Palestinian state, that kind of discussion is a deterrent to moving forward. So you've got an introduction of a new thought. Jeff Helper and others are saying a 1 democratic pluralistic state. And you've been engaged with Jeff Helper, which we want to learn a little bit more about today. And you've also met Bernard Avishai and are introducing, not completely brand new, this has been around for a long time as well. In fact, it goes back to 1947, the notion of a confederation. That was one of the things that was discussed by the United Nations in 1947. And it was a very close vote, but it was voted for the partition, which had been the official position of the international community for all those 70 years. And now you're wanting to say, no, the original idea of a confederation, which preserves the political and cultural integrity of both Israelis and Palestinians, is something we really have to give attention to. So I've opened it up a number of areas, and you can respond in any one of the things that I've said.
Sure. The 2 friends of mine that you mentioned, Bernard Avishai, professor of political science, a very business-oriented person as well, teaches at Dartmouth University.
Oh, wow.
And Jeff Halper, who I think is known to many of you, a longtime activist from Minnesota, Israeli American. These 2 Israeli friends of mine are long-term friends. I mean, we've known each other for a very, very long time. Bernard Avishai, I met maybe 15, 20 years ago. He came to Ramallah for a lecture that I forget exactly what the topic was at the time, but then he was sitting in the front of the room and I was sitting in the back of the room. And he got up and made a statement when he was asking his question. And he was pretty impressive in the way he asked his question. And then he left. I mean, he sat for 10, 15 minutes. The lecture was still going on. He started walking out of the room. I took out a business card and I handed it to him as he was walking out. And I never thought anything about it. He called a couple of days later and we've been friends ever since. Jeff Halper, I've known in his capacity as a peace activist. One of the most intellectual persons that I know within the mindset of liberation. He was the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, and I used to work as much as I could in supporting that effort. He used to actually rebuild houses and bring foreigners to rebuild houses. And as they were rebuilding the houses at night, they would have lectures, and he would ask me to come and speak to the groups, and I would do that. In terms of the more recent activity with both of them, Bernard and I have written an op-ed in the New York Times that was published 2 weeks ago now, I guess, or 2-3 weeks ago. I'll put it in the chat, which basically says, if we want peace, let's try confederation. What is confederation? When you say the word confederation in the context of our conflict, people immediately start thinking a confederation between Palestine and Jordan, given that Israel refuses to recognize Palestine. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, what I can speak for myself here, what I'm saying is that the two states already exist on paper in international law. They are codified. Those two states, Palestine and Israel, have a relationship which is, one is an occupier and one is an occupied people. So the people in that state are occupied. And what has to happen is that we remove the occupation. That's step one. Yeah. And then what will happen? And a lot of times I've come to the conclusion that a lot of the Israeli public doesn't want to, I think, continue to send their kids to be military occupiers. I believe that. I mean, I think the silent majority in Israel, Israeli mothers don't have boys to send them to Hebron to shoot at the water tanks, let alone the people in the occupied territory. However, there's a fear of what will happen the day after occupation ends. And what we did is we produced a concept, and as John rightly said, it's not a new concept, that a confederation between Palestine and Israel, and we started to articulate the day after occupation, how two states with a national identity for both start to think about how to work together economically as well as in various sectors. The prime example is tourism. If you're a tourist and you're coming to the Holy Land, you don't want to see checkpoints between Nazareth and Bethlehem. You want to be able to go through the entire territory, and I would say even continue on to Jordan and see the entire Holy Land. So there is a vested interest that all the parties start to think constructively going forward. Of course, we're not going to be able to think constructively if we're under military occupation. It's very hard to breathe, as we now know, when there's a boot on your neck. So the idea was to think forward and to show the Israelis that they have more to gain by ending the occupation and looking at us as partners in a future joint vision than to continue to think that they can occupy us forever, which has never happened in history, and it's not going to happen here. Jeff Halper started this, he's one of the founders of the One Democratic State effort. I highly respect that effort. I believe that he speaks to the heart more than he speaks to the political mind. What do I mean by that? Jeff has given up on his society. He doesn't think the Israeli society can change from within. And that's actually a debate that he and I have every time he comes to Ramallah. We go to lunch, and I say we have to put effort to change the Israelis to think and see the occupation for what it is. And he starts shaking his head and says, Sam, they know and they don't care. And that's the debate that we have. And so he's basically said the two states as a future model can no longer happen, basically because the Israelis have torn up the territory with all the settlement building to the point where it makes it infeasible. We differ on that. He wrote a book that articulates his movement's position, and I wrote a book review of his book, and the title of it is, I would like this Israeli settler to live next to me. He calls himself a settler in Israel. And I would say that's the kind of settler that I want. One that's looking for equality, looking for not how to beat Palestinians, but how to join Palestinians in building one state. I have no problem with the actual mindset that's there. My only problem is that from a political perspective, I see it far-fetched today. That doesn't mean it won't happen in the future. But today, I think we need to think politically, and the world is aligned today, and the Palestinian movement is aligned around statehood. And then once statehood gets created, we can start with a confederation. We can easily, in 100 years, 50 years, 30 years, end up with one state. I'm open to all of that thinking. But as a political person, I have to think about the here and now. And for me, the here and now is statehood without occupation, and both Palestine and Israel start to rehabilitate themselves, because both actually need to be rehabilitated. Sorry for the long answer.
Well, that's okay. I am now reading from your op-ed that appeared in the New York Times on February 12 of 2021, where you set forth in outline form some of the things that Confederation might mean. Let me read one of the paragraphs as an illustration of what you've just tried to say.
Okay.
Drive into Nablus, and you see a half dozen high box factories, much like those in Hebron. So you see Nablus is sort of the base of Palestinian activity, and Hebron, of course, is the place where a lot of Palestinians are, and there's the occupation of a number of settlers, maybe 300-400. Drive into Nablus, and you see half dozen big box factories, much like those in Hebron, operated by Palestinian contractors that employ thousands of Palestinian workers in industries such as furniture, manufacture, plastics, quarrying, and so on. The day the Israeli army is relieved, in other words, end the occupation, the day the Israeli army is relieved of the burden of shielding the hilltop settlements surrounding Nablus will be the day that Route 5, reviled by Palestinians as a settler expressway, could be extended to connect Tel Aviv to the Jordan Valley and thus become an asset both states would have an interest in developing. This is one of your points, right?
Correct. The idea is we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, we have had an Israeli imposition on our lives, whether it's in infrastructure and roads and other things. I mean, telecom, for example, when we took over the telecommunication network, people wanted to think that it was devastated. It was very bad. Actually, just the opposite. We had the first digital network in the Arab world. Why? Because Israel, before Oslo, used to collect our taxes, buy the latest and greatest Israeli equipment, and actually put it in the occupied territory in a way to test it before they sell it to the global market. So when we took over, we ended up with the best network the Arab world can see. And we didn't take that equipment and throw it out of the door and say, we want to start from scratch. That's not how development happens. We said, this is the hand that we were dealt. This is good infrastructure. Now let's expand on it. And that's one of the reasons why Paltal was able to turn a profit from day one. It's because they leveraged what was here. Some things may be leveraged in a political fashion. There is no equivalency between an illegal settler and a refugee. No equivalent, not moral and not legal. When the occupation ends, there will not be a settler in Palestine. What there may be, if the Palestinian entity accepts it, is Israelis who want to live under Palestinian rule. I'll even go one step further, as we did in the article, and say they may become permanent residents of Palestine, but they have to accept to live under Palestinian rule because there won't be any more settlements. Now, I would assume most of the settlers will probably leave. They probably don't want to live under Palestinian rule, and that's their right. What do we do with the infrastructure that the settlements created? Do we knock them all down, like the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon did in Gaza, the most densest place in the world? We could have made use of those houses. Instead, they demolished all the houses before they took their settlers out of Gaza. That doesn't have to happen. We can benefit from some of the infrastructure. And those are just examples of how we can benefit and leverage some of the things that we were dealt in these hard 53 years of a military occupation. But again, it's the Palestinians who will decide how and to drive their own state. We cannot be imposed on, not by Israel or not by the US or others. And the idea is two real states, not a half a state, not a 3/4 of a state, but a full sovereign state as defined in international law.
So a full state that would have room for the Palestinian entities and room for Israeli cultural and political and economic flourishing as well. This is a pretty revolutionary, Sam, to get this done.
What we said in the article and what we believe is Israeli citizens that could be permanent residents. If they develop, and I assume they will, into a cultural hub somewhere, great. Just like, I come from Youngstown, Ohio. I'm half Lebanese and half Palestinian. There's a Palestinian cultural scene in Youngstown, and there's actually a Lebanese cultural scene in Youngstown, right next to the Irish scene in Youngstown. Those all happily live together. We have no problem with multicultural societies. What we have a problem with is one of the entities thinking that they can be a supreme entity above and beyond the others. And that exclusivity is what has brought us to the point where we are today.
There's a lot of questions coming up, and I'm going to back away, but I want you to say something about this. It appears to me that what is going on now is the end game of extremism, where Israelis are not going to be able to insist all of this land is ours forever, and we are not going to have anything to do with the native population, as over against the extremism of the Palestinians, among whom there are still some, I'm sure, who say, no, all the Israelis have to leave. They're illegal. They are not permitted to be here. They have to leave. And so that's the kind of extremism that Jonathan Katub has taken account of when he says beyond the two-state solution. He wants Palestinians to embrace Israelis, and he wants Israelis to embrace Palestinians. And one of the things that I want us to address as a Kairos community is this whole matter of heart and soul, heart and mind, opening up to the other, which is a it's a spiritual issue in my view. How can we foster a spirit of, oh, you are there, we are here. How can we work together to solve our problems in a common way?
What we have today is more than only an exclusive military rule. What we have today is what, for example, Beit Tselem, the largest Israeli human rights organization, just issued a report saying, finally, that what we have is a state of apartheid. We have a state which has legislated in the legal system as well in their minds that it is okay to be able to be superior and have an inferior population. It is okay to keep that boot of occupation on the other's neck. That's what we're looking at removing. And actually, I would say, John, something very important, which is, and I wrote this in The Guardian, I think, a while back, the Palestinians are coming full circle. We started when we first got hit by this conflict. Remember, we didn't go to Europe or the US to look for a conflict. We were sitting in our homes when a conflict came to us from Europe. And one of the first political reactions to that, after we woke up from the shock, was the creation of one democratic state, one person, one vote for Muslims, Christians, and Jews. That was refused by Israel from day one. And it took us a long time to get beyond that thinking and to watch how the world has accepted Israel to be founded in the way it was founded. Now we come and we say, look we've accepted that your existence is here. We've accepted that there are some facts that we're not going to be able to change, political facts. And those, once we've accepted them, we need equality. Edward Said wrote 3 words one time, and it's my motto in life: equality or nothing. Equality or nothing. We can have equality in 2 states. We can have equality in 1 state. But if you ever think that you're going to maintain a military presence in my life, in all of my sectors, that can't be sustainable if you read world history. So what we're telling the Israeli side is we're giving you a ladder to come down off the tree. We hope you take it, because if you don't, the next generation of Palestinians that were born and raised under your occupation are basically saying, we're going to throw statehood out of the window, and we're going to convert this struggle to a civil rights struggle. And Israel, if that happens, you no longer exist as a state. So in a way, we're giving Israel that ladder. They have to have the momentum to bring it down, and they need supported. One way we can support them from the US, for example, is to stop funding them blindly. We have to give a cost to them to maintain this occupation. If there's no cost to maintaining the occupation, why should they do anything different? They'll just build another settlement.
Yes, right. Well, I'm going to back away and allow Bart to sift through your many comments and questions and take over from there.
Great. Thank you, John. Building on the infrastructure question, obviously a lot of the infrastructure that was built in roads, et cetera, in the West Bank have to do with separating Israelis and Palestinians. What I hear you say, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, is that in a confederation, though that infrastructure would transfer to Palestinian control, and that it would be used by both Israelis and Palestinians for the benefit of all people, right?
To be very accurate, whatever infrastructure remains in place after the agreement, remember, I noted in Israel when they disengaged, they didn't end the occupation, they disengaged from Gaza, they took a strategic decision to destroy infrastructure. They may do the same here, I don't know. Assuming that the Palestinian state, when occupation ends, is left with some Israeli infrastructure, those become assets of the state of Palestine. It's not for me to say how they will be used, if they will be maintained, and who will use them. It will become the state's assets. My assumption is that common sense will prevail, and where infrastructure can be used, it will. Where it will not be used, it will come down. For example, I'll tell you one example of one thing that will come down. That wall, that apartheid wall that they built, about 10, 12% of it is inside the Palestinian state. That will come down. The International Court of Justice already said it was illegal. It's disrupting Palestinian farmers to get to their farms. There's no need for that wall to exist, in addition for it to be an eyesore. I can see that as being one of the first remnants of a military occupation that came down. Think of the Berlin Wall. We'll be selling pieces of this wall as souvenirs to the people who come and see the state of Palestine.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sam. One comment mentioned in Finland and Sweden, the historical reality of an occupying force leaving and then people living together peacefully in a model that sounds a lot like what you described. Can you comment on that?
Yes, I can. And thanks for that reminder, because in the article, I'm not sure if it's in the article, but Bernie talks when we talk about the article. He was in Canada most of his life before he came to Israel, and he talks about how Quebec actually had to do a confederation-style agreement with Ontario to become one state called Canada. And when he talks about it, it's amazing. It wasn't a given thing. It was a very narrow vote. Quebec could have become a different state, right? So there are different models. But one thing we always say, Bernie and I, if there wasn't, and we do put this in the article, if there wasn't an exact model that we can pull from, we would have to create a new model for Palestine and Israel. There are no two conflicts that are the same. We're using the mindset of a model, but nothing is cut and paste. So we would have to create, if it didn't exist, the word confederation to serve the exit of this conflict, in our opinion.
Sure. And maybe you can count on the political reality of why is it called a confederation and not just a two-state solution? Can you help me understand that?
It is a form of a two-state solution. The two-state solution, to me, is done. And I think we're wasting time when we keep talking about one state or two states. From my understanding, once Palestine was awarded in the UN membership, and once 140 some countries recognize the state of Palestine, it's over. The state of Palestine is our goal, and the goal has been codified. We are now at a different stage of the struggle, and that struggle is to remove the occupation from the state. Confederation enters to talk about what next? What next after occupation? It could be the two states don't have a confederation and they just live together forever. That didn't work up until now. The Israelis aren't getting convinced to end the occupation with that model in mind. So we're thinking the Confederation, the post two-state moving forward, gives them something positive to look at to be able to finally accept the two-state solution in their mindset. The world has already accepted it. So the idea of Confederation is post-occupation relationship and not Confederation before the states get created. Because the ingredients of a confederation are two states, not a state and an occupied people.
It has been said that the main Israeli emotion regarding this conflict is fear. And the main Palestinian emotion surrounding this conflict is anger. Do you have thoughts on how to address those two basic emotions in light of John's talk about it being a matter of the heart, a spiritual matter, and how we might move forward with those two realities?
My sister is a clinical psychologist, so we had a long discussion once about fear. And from her training, she taught me something. And she said, Sam, keep in mind that if somebody has a fear, it could be a false fear. It could be a fear that of heights, that the elevator is going to fall. And you know it's not going to fall. It's been tested. And she said, but for the person who carries that fear, it doesn't matter. The false fear and the real fear are merged together in one. The problem is we as a Palestinian movement are not psychologists. We can't go on Amazon and buy a couch for 6 million Israelis to sit on and work them through their fear. The best we can do is to recognize their existence as a state and show them a way forward that makes more sense than living with a military occupation all their life. On the Palestinian side, I can talk a lot about anger and rights, but instead of spending the time here to do that, I'm going to give you a prelude to something coming out tomorrow in the New York Review of Books. It's a long read article from a friend of mine, Nathan Thrall. I read it today, it's 49 pages, a serious article. And it talks about the history of how Israel applied its military mindset to do what it has done. And weaved within it is a story about the here and now of how the occupation is affecting us. It is an amazing piece of work. So I'll post it on all my social media, but I encourage you tomorrow to look at the New York Review of Books website, and you'll see this article by Nathan Thrall.
Thank you, Sam. John, do you have questions related to the current U.S. administration and Sam's ideas
Yes,
about how that can? We have about 10 minutes of talk time, followed by some question and answers if anybody has any. So just setting that stage.
Yeah, I want to give another illustration from Sam's writings. And Sam, you may want to elaborate on this. You are putting an emphasis on Biden, a new administration in place of Trump, who wants to enthrone a Jewish-centric ethnocracy. The Biden administration could make such a difference, you say at the end of your article on the New York Times op-ed, could make such a difference if immediately it insisted that the Israeli government remove barriers to letting Palestinian entrepreneurs, say from Kuwait or Dearborn, Michigan, to settle and build new businesses in the cities of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The administration should encourage a common market with Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, and press for completion of the Quartet-sponsored gas pipeline that could bring electricity and desalinized water to Gaza. This is an illustration of how the United States could move away from the Trump order and to a different way of doing things. Say more about that.
Sure. I'll start by actually putting something in the chat and talking about it here, which is, I wrote several years ago 101, literally 101 items that an Israeli administration can do tomorrow morning that would not end the conflict, but would reduce the tension. The bulk of the 101 items have to do with the economy. If Israel had any respect for law, because remember, we're not the first people to be occupied, and sadly, we're not going to be the last. There is a body of law that regulates a military occupation. It's called the Fourth Geneva Convention. And if the Fourth Geneva Convention was applied, there wouldn't be economic chaos here. There wouldn't be pillaging of our resources. There wouldn't be a humanitarian disaster. So first and foremost, there are items on the books that have been articulated not only by me, but by the World Bank and by so many others, that the US can say, Israel, we might not be able to end the conflict this week, but you need to start getting that boot slowly off the Palestinians' neck, because they're not going to be able to create a different kind of society if you're going to control every aspect of their society. One example, and I'm recalling it because it's in that article that's coming out tomorrow, is the largest sector in Palestine is what? Stone and marble. We have some of the highest quality stone and marble in the world. Go to San Diego Airport and you'll find our stone and marble was used in the construction of the airport. Israel basically has given, over the last several years, Israeli companies the right and permits to come into the West Bank and to mine our stone and marble, literally taking the land and marketing it as products made in Israel or using it in Israeli construction. That's taking our biggest asset and stripping it from us. The second example I would give you, and this should be something that all of you can relate to, your tax money is going to Israel every single year to the tune of, as you know, $3.8 billion now. We don't need it. We as Palestinians, on the other side of your support that everybody's saying Biden now should start supporting the Palestinians, we already give the Israelis 3.8 billion. Let's re-engage the Palestinians with funding. I would say, thank you, but we really don't need it for two reasons. One, US funds come highly conditioned to the point where it tries to blackmail us politically. We don't need that. Two, we actually don't need any of the world's money, even though we respect everyone who wants to help us. Why? We have natural gas reservoirs that were found in the Sea of Gaza in 1999. Israel to date is refusing to allow the Palestinians to tap their natural gas, estimated at $3 or $4 billion. That would make a Palestinian economy jump. If Israel gets its boot off of our neck, that will require states like the US, like the Biden administration, not to throw more money at us, but to stand up and tell their ally, enough is enough. Apply international law, apply common sense, and let them have a business community. And I can write books about what can be done on the business side of things to make things easier so people can actually have a livelihood. If we don't have livelihoods created, we have unemployment. In Gaza, it's over 50% today. Let the unemployment rate, and with COVID, it's getting worse, increase more, and you will have social unrest that is bound to spill into Israel. Is that what they really want? Some Israelis tell me yes. They want more violence because that's the only language they understand. I want to pretend like they don't want more violence and that they need pressure from outside, from Kairos, from the US government, from the church community to tell Israel, enough is enough. And from the Jewish American community, telling Israel, we love you, but enough is enough. Back off.
How hopeful are you that these pressure points can be brought and will be brought to bear? For example, do you have hope in the Biden administration and the Jewish American Jewish people pressuring, or where is that in terms of that a pipe dream, or is that a hopeful reality, or where are you at that?
I'm a long-term person. I don't look for tomorrow changing much, but I do look for incremental change. And when I see the Jewish American community is the best example. When I left the US 25 years ago, there was AIPAC. That was about the only voice we heard from the Jewish American community. Today, you have a plate full of Jewish American efforts, everything from J Street, which may be only 1 inch away from AIPAC, but it's a very significant inch, all the way to Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now. All of those organizations are calling for ending the military occupation. If that can happen in a short 20 years, I'm sure that the societies at large can create more efforts. And I'm hopeful because I'm seeing it at the international level. When I see the ICC finally acting on Israeli war crimes, that's positive. When I see Bernie Sanders, a contender for the US president in 2016, stand up and say, Palestinians are human. That's a low bar. He got pushback for it, but there's change happening even in the Democratic Party. So yes, I do think the younger generation is equipped with the knowledge about what occupation means. They're equipped with wanting to maintain a rule-based world. Thank you, Mr. Trump. You reminded everyone about how important a rules-based world is. So anyone today still trying to support Israel as they continue to build settlements and demolish homes and uproot trees is on the wrong side of history. It's that simple.
One of the things that I found ironic, Sam, is the acceptance of the normalization of Bahrain and also the UAE. Oh, we really enjoy these Arab countries, and yet at the same time, they're ignoring the Arabs in their own geographic region. Say a little bit more about the normalization thing and what that means.
It's amazing how the United States can, or I'm sorry, to start with Israel to start. It's amazing how Israel can be a democracy of the Middle East, the villa in the jungle, as one of the prime ministers used to say in Israel. And then at the same time, go make deals with the apes of the jungle. These non-democratic, autocratic regimes, which are suppressing their own people, who have very little relationship to Palestine and Israel. Basically what we saw, supported by the US administration under Trump, was not peace agreements because these countries were not at war. What we saw was trade agreements, not any trade agreements, arms trade agreements. What the Trump administration did, along with Israel, is provoked a new round of a war, an arms war, an arms reality, which is bound to come back and bite the US. Because an arms race in the Middle East is a tinderbox waiting to explode. That's what these were about. It was about buying F-35s, not about ending the Israeli occupation. And what that did to the Palestinians, it was a blow to the stomach, a hard blow. Because up until that point, ever since the Arab Peace Initiative in 2000, and I think it was 12, that the Israelis totally ignored, the entire Arab and Islamic world told Israel, end this occupation and we will all normalize with you, all 50-some states. And Israel just ignored it. And up until that point, the Arab world was united in standing together, not normalizing with Israel. So what Bahrain and Emirates did is they broke that unified front. It's their right to do that. And it's a more Arab-oriented issue than it is a global issue. But today I laughed when I read in the news that the president of Emirates, the prince or whatever it is, he was a sheikh, I'm sorry. He was uproar today. And he was basically saying, I'm canceling Netanyahu's visit to the Emirates. Why? Because he's abusing the relationship for his campaign. Well, I have news for him. He's going to abuse the relationship until there's nothing left in the relationship, because the relationship was a false one to start with.
Great. Thank you, Sam. I'm going to open it up for questions. And meanwhile, I'll watch for questions in the chat. And John, if you have a final question while people get their questions in, if there's any coming, we'll spend about 10 minutes. And we're at that point where right now we're about an hour in. And so if you feel like you need to leave, again, they're all adults. You have permission to leave. Don't feel bad about that. And we're gonna continue just a bit with question and answers. Please, everybody, stay if you have the time. So, John, you have a final question, and I'll watch for more questions showing up in the chat.
Yes, well, I want to say that if you want to say something, not in the chat box, Bart will let you unmute yourself, and address us personally, if you like. I want to say again, as a retired pastor and one who's concerned about fears and dreams and anger, I know that there's a spirit of Israel first and America first in our country, and the forces of wanting to do something with the enemy, with the other, these continue to grow. And in 2018, you had the Israelis saying in basic law, this is a Jewish state. I mean, they took away all pretense of the original Declaration of Independence, where they would be open to the other, of those with different ethnic and religious background. They have moved consistently and persistently against wanting to be open to the other. And we have to pray, it seems to me. We have to pray that we will be open to the adversary, open to those who may hurt us, open to be in discussion and to talk about the real issues. The Holocaust victims who are dying out now are just fear-filled. They're filled with fear about being overcome and overwhelmed and delegitimized and destroyed. And we somehow have to deal with that fear and be healed internally of hurts and not continue to hurt other people on that. Some comments, please, from somebody else.
Can I make a statement while someone prepares their comments?
Yes, please.
I fully agree with you. And I would say that being in the mindset of wanting to work with the other doesn't mean not taking concrete steps to hold the other accountable. And I would give two examples. The boycott, divestment, sanction campaign is a non-violent tool to hold the other accountable. We didn't invent it, we're using it. And I would highly support such efforts. And the other is in the US. And you guys are facing this like everyone else. The US states, and now at the federal level, have started a process of criminalizing anybody who speaks out for Palestine against the occupation.
Yeah.
And they've done something worse. It comes back to what you said, John. They started to call people who speak out against the occupation anti-Semites.
Yeah.
They're putting that label. They're demeaning that label. That label is real. There are real anti-Semites out there. And when we start to put anti-occupation in the same bucket as anti-Semites, then those Holocaust survivors should be pissed off, because that means we're reducing the ability for people to speak out when they need to speak out. And here, I'll just mention lastly, I'm a board member of Just Vision. Just Vision produces documentaries. It's an outfit out of Washington, DC. And we're producing a new film called, it's untitled. Our working title is Free Speech. And basically it's addressed to the US audience. We're showing the US audience, because of Palestine and Israel, your constitutional right is being stripped from you to be able to speak out or boycott. And that's going to come out shortly. I highly encourage everyone to keep an eye out for it.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Any comments on US-Iran relations and how that might have an effect on this whole process of confederation and relations between Palestinians and Israelis?
One point I would make, in those negotiations, the US, again, is putting itself in a position to reveal its double standard. How can you ask Iran to stop developing a nuclear weapon, and you've allowed and supported all of these years Israel not only to create a nuclear weapon, majorly, but also not to sign the non-proliferation treaty? And you can't ask the whole world to sign on to non-proliferation and then ignore your ally. It doesn't work. And I think if Trump brought anything to the picture, he brought clarity. That we need to be very clear in our politics and get rid of this double standard. It doesn't work. I watched last week a new film that just came out. I highly recommend it, called The Mauritanian. It's about Guantanamo Bay. Look at that and you will see how the US double standards plays out. I actually have it listed on my Facebook wall if you look at that. The Mauritanian.
Yeah, thank you. There's obviously a strong relationship between end times churches and right-wing evangelicals and support for Israel. do you have any comments about a more progressive audience that perhaps this is, that our response to that sort of thing going on and how we might be able to affect that dialogue?
Yes, I mean, just like some of these 20-some states that have started to criminalize and call any kind of anti-occupation efforts anti-Semitic, the Christian community needs to stand up, because you have a group of religious-oriented folk who are basically claiming that supporting Israel in any way, shape, or form, including the suppressing of Palestinians' rights, is somehow biblically oriented. I can't find that in the Bible. I couldn't see where God actually said one people, it's okay to destroy them. It's okay to diminish their rights. We need to stand out for when you have these very politicized, supposedly religious efforts, like Christians United for Israel. They claim they have 10 million supporters in the US. They were the people in bed with Trump. And basically, Trump was basically having a policy as it relates to Palestine, Israel, to serve his base. That was his base. And I think that Christian efforts around the country need to speak out loudly and say that doesn't relate to the way mainstream Christianity views the other. I'm not saying you have to love Palestinians. I am saying you can't support a boot that's on my neck and pay for it as well.
Sam, the only other thing another thing that we've not really discussed is you have taken a very strong role in addressing Palestinian leadership and its inadequacies and the need for new representation by some of the younger Palestinian voices. You've been very critical of President Abbas, and bring us up to date on your thinking about the coming election and what needs to happen with Palestinian leadership.
Two things I'll say here briefly. One is, we, believe it or not, have internal Palestinian politics. A lot of times, the US wants to believe that we're just one block and we all think exactly the same. Of course, that couldn't be further from the truth. Our internal politics are as sloppy as yours in the United States. And we have issues that have to be resolved internally. And the first thing I would note is, although that's our reality, like your reality is your reality, when the people produce a president, in our case, when the people respect that the PLO is their representative body, the international community looking on doesn't have to worry about all the mess inside. They just need to recognize that body. So because we have sloppy internal politics, who doesn't, is no excuse, for example, for the US not to recognize the state of Palestine. If that was the case, can you imagine how many countries would have withdrew their recognition of the United States of America, given what Trump did? That doesn't happen. So recognizing that the Palestinians have an internal reality, it's a sloppy one. We have a recognized body that sits at the UN, so our address is known, anybody who wants to talk with us. The last thing I'll say is these elections that are coming up, I personally have a lot of issues with these elections and how they came about. We haven't had elections here for 14 years. And to be honest with you, there's a dilemma. One part of me says elections in any shape or way or form is better than no elections. And the other part of me, which is actually the part which is driving right now, is saying no, process matters. And I guess as an American, coming out of the last 4 years of what the White House gave us, no, process matters. It doesn't, producing a Trump is problematic. I actually wrote an article back in November before the elections and said, before the US elections, and basically said the US needs to get Trump out of office before the November 3rd elections, because he is damaging to the entire body of the American democracy. And here, the same thing kind of is happening now. Yes, we're having elections. That's a very positive word, but they're within a framework that could cause more damage than good. But again, that's an internal domestic issue. I don't know how to write Arabic, but if I wrote Arabic, the last 2 articles that I wrote about our internal affairs would have been totally in Arabic, because that was my audience. But because I only write in English and get translated, you got a picture of what our domestic politics looks like.
Great, thank you, Sam. We're running really near the end of our time here, and again, we promise to honor everybody's time. What a blessing it's been for all of us, Sam, to hear your perspective. And again, what we're really interested in hearing from people on the ground in Palestine about what your life is like, both locally and your views on international situations like what we've been discussing. So thank you so much for enlightening all of us with your perspective. I think we all feel that we're better equipped to move forward and keep the conversation going here for peace and justice and lasting peace. And what a great model you presented for us today. So
Thank you.
thank
I
you.
would just note that the blog that's listed under my photo there, epalestine.ps, has all of my social media links. Feel free to link up with me to stay abreast of what's happening. My email is listed as well. And I warn you that I'm one of 6 Palestinians worldwide that will reply to your emails. So you will get a reply to me if you'd like. And keep your eye out for that New York Review of Books article tomorrow.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, John, for moderating our time today. And I wish all of you a blessed day. And we will post this on our website, kairoswestmichigan.org. We'll post the recording of this on that website if you're so interested. Thank you, people. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Sam.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, John.
Welcome, Dave. Blessings to all. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sam. You really summarized a lot of issues and brought us up to date. Thank you very much.